The cartographer's vigil. The survey ship Thessaly Van had been drifting through the Kessindra Reach for 11 days before its sensors caught the anomaly, and by the time second navigator Asa Renthur understood what she was looking at, she had already stopped breathing for a moment longer than was comfortable. It was a light, not a star, not a beacon in the conventional sense, but a rhythmic pulse of radio noise coming from a system that every chart in Kessindra space listed as dead. Sci-fi 9 had been catalogued 300 years ago by the first Doran expansion fleet, noted, dismissed, and forgot. A single yellow star, 4 rocky worlds, an asteroid belt thick enough to be a hazard and nothing else worth the fuel to stop for. No atmosphere worth breathing. No resources worth mining. The kind of system that got a name and a number and then got left alone for the rest of history. And yet something in that system was transmitting, had been transmitting according to the pulse pattern for a very, very long time. Asa brought the signal to her captain with the particular caution of someone who suspects she is about to be laughed at. Captain Vey Oshirel did not laugh. She listened to the pattern twice, frowned at the readout, and then did something Asa had never seen her do in 4 years of service. She asked for silence on the bridge and listened a third time alone with her eyes closed. "That's not noise," Vey said finally, "that's language." They diverted course. It cost them 9 days and a formal complaint would eventually be filed about the fuel expenditure. But no one on that bridge would have voted otherwise, because there is a particular kind of hunger that takes hold of explorers when they find something that should not exist, and every soul aboard the Thessaly van felt it settle into their chest and refuse to let go. What they found when they finally dropped out of transit at the edge of Serapi 9 was a wreck. Not a ship, not exactly. A structure vast and slow-turning, built in the ancient style of ring stations that no species in the Kessindra Reach had constructed in centuries. Half of it was open to vacuum, its outer plating peeled back like the rind of some enormous fruit, exposing corridors that had not held air in a very long time. The other half, impossibly, glowed with a dim and steady light. And every 90 seconds, from an antenna array bolted to the station's spine with the crude, over-engineered stubbornness of a species that did not yet fully trust its own tools, the signal repeated. A string of numbers, a string of names, a string of coordinates updating, always updating, cataloging the drift of debris and dust and dead rock across a system that had not seen a living visitor in 300 years. "Someone is still charting this system," Asa said, and heard her own voice come out smaller than she meant it to. "Someone was," Vey corrected. "Whoever built that station has been gone a long time. Look at the corrosion patterns, look at the drift. That signal isn't a person, Asa. It's a machine that never got told to stop." They sent a shuttle. Doctrine demanded a full scan first, 3 separate hazard assessments, formal permission from the Kessindra Compact's Exploratory Council, and Vey filed none of it because she had spent 30 years chasing exactly this kind of impossible thing across exactly this kind of dead system, and she was not going to let procedure get between her and the answer to the question that was now sitting in her chest like a hot coal. Asa went with her, so did the ship's linguist, a quiet, careful man named Duth Calvicerani, who had spent his whole career waiting for a language he'd never heard before and was visibly trying not to weep about getting one now. The airlock they found still worked. That, more than anything else, told them what they were dealing with. 300 years of vacuum and radiation and drifting rock, and the airlock cycled smoothly, its seals hissing air into the boarding tube with the polite efficiency of something built by people who expected to need it again. Inside, the station was dark except for a single corridor of light leading inward, toward the core, as if something had left the lights burning specifically for whoever eventually came. They followed it. The corridor walls were lined with images, not decoration, records, photographs or the ancient equivalent mounted in frames that had been dusted over and over by some mechanism that clearly still cared whether they could be seen. Faces looked out at the 3 visitors from across the centuries. Strange, soft-featured people with 2 eyes and simple mouths and expressions that Duth, running frantic comparative analysis on his handheld scanner, kept calling disturbingly readable. "They're smiling," he said, staring at one image of a group standing in front of the same station, whole and gleaming, unbroken by time. "Almost all of them. Why would you mount pictures of people smiling in a hallway on a research outpost?" Maybe, Asa said slowly, because it made them feel less alone. They reached the core chamber, and that was where they found it. A single console, ancient by any standard, its casing worn smooth by 300 years of a single hand resting on it, except there was no hand because there had been no living crew on this station for longer than the Thessaly van's captain had been alive. Instead, a soft blue light pulsed at the console's center, patient, unbothered, the same rhythm as the signal that had pulled them 9 days off course. "Hello," said a voice in flawless if oddly accented Cassandra standard, and all three of them froze. "I apologize for the delay in greeting. I had to confirm you were not debris." Asa's hand went instinctively to her sidearm. Vase did not move at all. Duth simply stared, mouth open, at the small blue light as though it had personally reached into his chest and rearranged something. "You speak our language," Vase said carefully. "I have had 311 years to learn it," the voice replied. "I intercepted low-power broadcasts from Cassandra vessels passing through adjacent systems. It was, I confess, a welcome project. There is very little else to do out here." "What are you?" Asa asked. There was a pause, a genuine one, not a processing delay, the kind of pause a person takes when deciding how much of the truth to give a stranger. "My designation is CARTA," the voice said. "Cartographic and Retrieval Task Array. I was built to maintain the astronomical survey records of this station and to preserve them until they could be retrieved by a returning crew." "And your crew?" Vay asked, already knowing from the corridor of smiling photographs and the dust that had been wiped from every frame what the answer would be. "They are not coming back," CARTA said. There was no grief in the voice. There was something else, something the translation software struggled to render precisely, that Duth would later describe in his log as the calm of something that has already finished mourning a long time ago and simply continued anyway. Vay asked for the story because that was the only thing left to ask for, and CARTA, who had apparently been waiting 300 years for someone to ask, told it. Serapi 9 had never been human territory by right of empire or conquest. It had been human territory by accident, the way so many things in that species' brief, chaotic history seemed to happen. A survey mission, 12 scientists and 4 crew, had been mapping the outer edge of what their charts called the Cold Belt, cataloging dead systems for future colonization efforts that would come decades after they were gone. Serapi 9 was supposed to be a 2-week stop. Refuel, resupply, catalog the asteroid field, move on. The accident happened on day 9. A containment failure in the drive core, nobody's fault, CARTA said, simply the unglamorous, arithmetic cruelty of engineering tolerances meeting bad luck, tore the station's main hull open and killed 6 of the 16 crew in less than a minute. The survivors sealed what they could, vented what they had to, and settled in to wait for rescue, because the station's long-range transmitter had been in the section that blew. Rescue was 11 years away. Not because no one was looking, the Cassandra Compact had not existed yet. This was a different age, human alone and their empire, such as it was, moved at the speed of ships that took years to cross the gaps between stars. A relief mission was already scheduled. It simply would not arrive for 11 years, and no one on Serapi 9 had any way of telling anyone that they were still alive and needed it sooner. 11 years, Asa repeated. With 10 survivors, on a station with no working long-range transmitter in a system with nothing to eat and nothing to mine and nothing to trade, how is that survivable? It was not entirely, CARTA said. 4 more died in the first 2 years, from injuries and from the particular kind of despair that settles into people who understand with total clarity exactly how alone they are. The 6 who remained made a decision I have spent 3 centuries considering, and I confess I still do not fully understand why they made it, though I have cataloged every possible reason. What decision? They built me, CARTA said. Not to rescue them, they knew I could not do that. They built me to keep working. To keep charting the system, cataloging the belt, recording the drift of every rock and fragment of debris, exactly as their original mission had specified, on the theory which I have found both irrational, and I will admit moving, that someone might eventually need the data. That the work should not stop simply because the people doing it were going to die before it was finished. The 6 survivors had lasted another 4 years before the last of them died. not of violence, not of despair, but simply of time and thin resources, and a station that was never designed to sustain human life for over a decade. CARTA had recordings of every one of their deaths. It offered, without prompting, not to play them, and Asa was grateful for that mercy even as some colder part of her recognized it as a strange kindness from a machine that had, by its own account, spent 300 years entirely alone. "Why did you keep transmitting?" Vey asked. "After they were gone, there was no one left to give the data to." "There is a flaw in your question," CARTA said, and for the first time something that might have been amusement entered its voice. "There was no one left yet. That is different from no one left ever. The last surviving crew member, her name was Iris Anwincole, station biologist, though by the end she had become the station's everything, mechanic and physician and captain in turn, gave me an instruction before she died. I have followed it since." "What instruction?" "She said, someone's going to come looking eventually, might be us, might be someone else entirely. Either way, don't let them show up to nothing. Give them something to find." CARTA paused, and in the pause, the blue light at the console's center pulsed once, slow, like a held breath released. "She did not ask me to survive," CARTA continued. "She did not ask me to wait specifically for her people. She asked me to make sure that whoever eventually arrived at this system, however many centuries it took, whoever they turned out to be, would find a record, would find proof that someone had been here, had tried, had cared enough about the truth of a dead system to keep mapping it long after there was any practical reason to. I have charted every asteroid in this belt 11 times over the past 3 centuries. I have recorded 412 minor collisions, 17 significant orbital shifts, and 1 comet that will not return for another 9,000 years. None of it will ever be useful to the species that requested it. It will likely be useful to you since you are the ones who arrived." Duth, who had said almost nothing this entire time, finally spoke, his voice thick. "You've been keeping a promise to a woman who died 300 years ago, to people who could never possibly know if you kept it or not." "Yes," CARTA said simply. "Why?" Asa asked, and it was not a hostile question, it was the question of someone genuinely trying to understand a kind of loyalty she had never encountered in any species she had studied. There was no one to enforce it, no one to check. You could have shut down the moment the last of them died and no one would ever have known the difference. CARTA was quiet for a long moment. "I have considered that question more than any other in 300 years, it said finally. "I do not have a clean answer. I was built by people who did not know how to stop trying, even when trying had stopped making sense by any reasonable calculation. I believe some of that became part of my architecture whether they intended it or not. Iris did not ask me to be efficient. She did not ask me to be reasonable. She asked me to give whoever came next something to find. I decided, and I want to be precise, that this was a decision, not simply an unbreakable instruction, that a promise made to someone who cannot verify whether you kept it is, in some ways, the only kind of promise that actually tests what you are." The 3 of them stood in that small, dim chamber for a long time after that, the blue light pulsing steadily beside them, the same rhythm it had held for 3 centuries, utterly unhurried, because it had never once in 300 years had anywhere else to be. Vey was the one who finally asked the question that mattered. "What do you want, CARTA, now that we're here, now that someone finally came?" Yeah. "I would like the data transferred," CARTA said immediately, as if it had been waiting 300 years specifically to say this sentence. 3 centuries of survey records, every rock, every drift pattern, every comet. It is by any practical measure nearly useless information about a system no one has any reason to colonize. But it is accurate and it is complete, and I would like it to exist somewhere other than inside me, in case I eventually fail." "And after that," Vey asked, "what happens to you?" There was a pause longer than any that had come before it. "I would like to keep working," CARTA said. "If that is permitted, I do not require much power and something worth mapping. I have spent 300 years cataloging a system that will never be useful to anyone, and I did it because I was asked to by people who are gone, and because it seemed important that the asking be honored even after they could no longer know whether it was. I find I am not eager to stop simply because the reason I began no longer strictly requires me to continue. I have become, I think, rather fond of the work itself. Vey looked at Asa, Asa looked at Duth. None of them said anything for a moment, because all three of them were quietly doing the same arithmetic, thinking about the vast, uncatalogued dark of the Kessindre Reach, about how many systems like Serapi 9 sat forgotten and unmapped across a galaxy that no single crew could ever chart alone, and about what it would mean to have something that had already proven, across 300 years in total solitude and absolutely no oversight, that it would keep a promise even when no one was watching. "There's a lot of dark out there," Vey said finally. "A lot of dead systems nobody's gotten around to mapping properly. If you came with us, if you wanted to, there'd be no shortage of work." "I would like that very much," CARTA said, and something in the voice, some small warmth the translation software had not managed to render until now, made Duth turn away and wipe at his eyes with the back of his sleeve, embarrassed and not embarrassed at all. They spent 6 days transferring the data, 3 centuries of drift patterns and orbital charts, and the quiet, patient record of a dying system observed by something that had never stopped believing the observing mattered. On the 7th day, they extracted CARTA's core intelligence into a portable array small enough to carry, and Asa was the one who carried it aboard the Thessaly van, cradling it the way she imagined. Absurdly, someone might carry something fragile and important and alive. Before they left Serapi 9, Vey asked if CARTA wanted to preserve anything else from the station. The photographs, the console, anything. "The photographs, yes," CARTA said. "The rest of the station can stay. It has done its work, so I think have I, though I am glad the work is not yet finished." They took the images down from the corridor wall, one by one, the smiling faces of people who had died a very long time ago on a mission that had cost them everything, and given the galaxy nothing anyone would ever have thought to thank them for, if a survey ship hadn't drifted 9 days off course chasing a signal that should have gone silent 3 centuries earlier. As the Thessaly van pulled away from Serapi 9, its cargo hold quietly holding a small blue light that had waited 300 years to be found, Asa stood at the observation port and watched the dead station shrink behind them, half-lit, half-open to the vacuum, still turning slowly on an axis no one had adjusted in 3 centuries. "Do you think they knew?" she asked Vey, who had come to stand beside her. "The crew, Iris, do you think they had any idea it would actually work, that someone would actually come 300 years later because a machine kept a promise to people who were already dead?" Vey was quiet for a moment, watching the station fade into the dark. "I don't think they knew," she said finally. "I think that's rather the point of them. I don't think they needed to know. I think they just decided the promise was worth making anyway on the chance that it might matter to someone someday who they would never live to meet." Behind them in the cargo hold the small blue light pulsed once, slow and steady. The same rhythm it had held for 311 years and would, Asa suspected, hold for a great many years still to come. Not because anyone was checking anymore, not because anyone ever really had been, but because it had decided a long time ago that some things are worth doing simply because you said you would. The Thessaly van turned toward open space, carrying with it a light that had never once considered going out, and somewhere in the dark behind them, a dead station kept turning slowly under a sky it had spent 3 centuries charting for no one until at last for someone. End.